both in our personal lives and in our political lives, both individually and when you scale it up and speak on the level of the community, the neighborhood, the city, the nation. We make decisions in the shadow of a million options we never truly gave consideration to because we presumed them to be impossible. The distinction between the possible and the impossible is thus of paramount political and emotional significance in our lives. What most people never learn to do is to think through in a systematic way a series of comparable options and alternatives. To move past the simplistic notion of impossibility in their heads to instead have a nuanced sense of the advantages and disadvantages of each possibility. Now, when you look at a towering, tyrannical, over-the-top figure like Elon Musk, you are talking about possibility and impossibility in a very crude sense. But nevertheless, we all have something to learn and something to reflect on, again, even in our own lives, personally, in moving past a simple sense of this is impossible. Now, to have one spaceship move back and forth between the Earth and Mars hundreds of times or 1,000 times, and to carry a small number of people between Earth and Mars on each trip would have a cost in the trillions of dollars. The numbers being dealt with are almost impossible to imagine. Almost impossible to imagine, but it doesn't mean it's impossible to do. That's not what Elon Musk is promising. What Elon Musk is promising is that he will build 1,000 ships that will make the trip simultaneously in an armada. So the number of trillions of dollars is here increased by more than 1,000-fold. The costs are astronomically higher. Now, let's just say you picture your entire family, your circle of all your friends and relations, everyone you know and care about in the city you're living in. And let's just say you learned that due to global warming, your city was going to be underwater. So you all have to move to some other, let's say you have to move to an empty field up in the mountains somewhere on higher ground. Say, okay, there are two ways I can do this. I can rent one bus and have a bus make a trip back and forth again and again over months. Or can have 1,000 buses. We're going to rent 1,000 buses simultaneously. We're all going to get loaded up together at the same time and move from one location to another. Which one is going to cost more money? Now, when we're dealing with space travel, when we're dealing with the cost of taking things from the surface of planet Earth and lifting them into orbit, just as step one. So this is not just the metal that the devices are made out of. Every pound and every ounce costs an enormous amount of money in jet fuel to elevate out of the Earth's atmosphere, but all of the water people are going to drink, all the food they're going to eat, all right, it gets ridiculous. It's much, much, much more difficult than planning a bus trip. But nevertheless, you can understand the difference between having one bus go back and forth in a bus trip and 1,000 buses going simultaneously. Now, if somebody said to you that building a city at the bottom of the ocean encased in a glass bubble is impossible, you could very easily in this context say, no, it's not. That's not impossible at all. But we get into some really interesting and challenging questions on this scale of magnitude when we're thinking about possibility and impossibility, the political costs and economic consequences. If you build a city at the bottom of the ocean, encased in a glass bubble, it probably has absolutely zero scientific value, nearly zero economic value, it has some tourist value. Some people are going to pay to go down in a submarine or something for the novelty of it. One could say much the same as much of the space program, frankly. If you start to estimate the costs of doing that, they are so much lower than sending just one team of human beings to Mars to live permanently on a space station Mars. Maybe even if just one person or two people living on a permanent, base on Mars, that it starts to seem like the easiest thing in the world. Now, what are the advantages of being at the bottom of the ocean? Well, you have access to hospitals. Like if someone gets sick while they're in this little bubble at the bottom of the ocean, you can put them on a submarine, bring them to the nearest city. Or you could take a doctor from the nearest city, put him on a submarine, send him to the bubble. Wow, what a cost savings. They have access to air. Oh, you might think air is hard to get at the bottom of the ocean. Try getting air on Mars. Okay, try getting air in Earth orbit. Okay, it's quite easy to bring air to the bottom of the ocean. It's quite easy to bring food. It's quite easy to bring potable water or to convert. And you have gravity. In fact, the advantages you have of having a colony, so to speak, at the bottom of the ocean over building a colony on the surface of Mars or the surface of the moon are so extreme. The number of trillions of dollars you would save, it's so radical that you can also make a kind of moral case for this. You can say morally, ethically, it's superior to build a city in a plastic bubble or a glass bubble, however you want to think of it, a translucent bubble at the bottom of the ocean. This is like a moral cause we should support, and we should stop fantasizing about or wasting billions and trillions of dollars on the possibility of lunar bases, orbital bases, permanent cities in orbit, and building a colony on Mars. So that's how much the cost savings is. There's a civil war in Myanmar right now. Some people want democracy and some people don't. How much would it cost to build an earthly paradise in Myanmar compared to building a city encased in glass at the bottom of the ocean, an orbital platform with 1 million people living on it permanently, a colony on the surface of Mars, a permanently inhabited moon base? How much would it cost to raise the standard of living in each and every town in Myanmar to be equal to Disneyland, California? Let's really set our sights high and let's do a cost estimate where the quality of public bathrooms and schools and roads and democracy is better than Anaheim, California. It's not. Perhaps not paradise. perhaps 20% better than Anaheim would qualify as paradise. And let's throw in some rides. Every single town has got to have at least a flume ride or a Ferris wheel. We can do cost estimates. How much does it cost to have 10,000 Ferris wheels for Myanmar? Okay. That may sound ridiculous. That may sound like a waste of money. You say the Burmese people don't need Ferris wheels. They need democracy. I say unto you, these things go hand in hand. They need Ferris wheels and they need wave pools. I can't even think of other examples. They need roller coasters, whatever. I never go to Disneyland or these kind of places. It's not my thing. If you say we are going to attempt the Disneylandification of Myanmar and you come up with a cost estimate, it's going to seem cheap compared to the space program. It's going to seem cheap compared to building a base on the bottom of the ocean. And you can already imagine why. I've sketched out some of these demographic factors, and it will have tremendous positive knock-on effects here on planet Earth. Now, nobody is talking about building Ferris wheels in Myanmar. Nobody is talking about building paradise in Myanmar. No one is talking about life in Myanmar being potentially better than life in Anaheim, California. Nobody even thinks it's possible. And we live our lives personally, professionally, emotionally, and politically within a cage of what we perceive to be possible and what we presume to be impossible. I can't count how many people I've spoken to who said to me that they'd like to learn Sanskrit, but it's impossible. And I got to sit them down and talk them through exactly how possible it is. Right? Whether it's Sanskrit or it's Pali or it's Latin or it's ancient Greek. And most of the time when you're talking to someone face to face, you can find some other activity they're doing in their life that takes up about this much time. Say, oh, do you go to the gym? When do you go to the gym every day? Oh, okay, really? So that adds up to 15 hours a week? Okay, guess what? The same amount of time you're spending at the gym now, you could be learning Latin, you could be learning ancient Greek, you could be learning Sanskrit, Pali, whatever the language is talking about. And I'm in a position, I have enough experience, I can talk them through exactly what that's like exactly what is attainable and what's unattainable, and how much help you need, or to what extent you can just do it with your own mobile phone, to what extent you can do it just with applications downloaded from the internet and the dictionaries you need to get. I can really give someone valuable advice on those steps if they want to do it. But you know what changes when you realize it's possible? Guilt, shame, responsibility, because now you realize it's been possible all along, and your concept of what's possible and impossible has been an excuse. It's an excuse you've been hiding behind, and it's even a mask you've been wearing that kind of prevents you from seeing reality around you in all of its detail. It's a mask that kind of cuts off your view of the full range of options and possibilities in your life, and you've been wearing it for all these years, right? And now you have to face up to what's possible. And the only thing lacking in the equation is you, your effort, your will, your resolution, your decision, your willingness to make it happen, right? Now, most, futurology, most talking about like what's attainable in our glorious, unthought of future has a lot more to do with the self-indulgent fantasies of Elon Musk than it has to do with the study of Latin or Sanskrit or Pali or Chinese or any other language, right? It's tragic. What the fantasies tell us a great deal about human nature, and one of the most central aspects of human nature is, after all, laziness. That's really what we're all struggling against here. Yes, wouldn't it be nice if someone else went ahead and made a colony on Mars for us to, sit back and enjoy, and nobody's interested. Oh yes, wouldn't it be wonderful if Elon Musk gets to live out his dream of farming corn on the surface of Mars, and they're not interested in the fact that Mars has not only no atmosphere to grow corn, no soil to grow corn, no gravity to grow corn. It also doesn't have sunlight to grow corn. Like the most obvious thing. It would literally be easier to grow corn at the bottom of the ocean than to grow it on the surface of Mars. If you start with it. But okay, what a great fantasy. And then you never stop and look at your own life and think, I could have bought a farm. I could get land. I could take up farming as a hobby or as a career. I could go from having it as a hobby to it really taking over. I could have done something productive and creative and innovative, and I could have done something with my life. If I think that's heroic, this vision of, going out to new frontiers and farming corn, what does that say about me, and what does that say about my life and what I presume about what's possible for me? The one that comes up most often in Canadian politics. Okay, if we're keeping it all the way real, what comes up most often is weight loss. What comes up most often is exercise and physical self-transformation, because people are shallow. And people live with a million different excuses for why they can't lose weight, why they can't get in shape, why they can't change their diet, why they can't change their habits. And you live surrounded by people who have excuses for why they can never read a book that's in their first language. Like they speak English first language, there's some book, and it's like, dude, if you write it down, if you write it on a chalkboard, so you wake up in the morning every day, it reminds you to read this book, you're going to get it read. There are things people live with, the illusion that they're impossible and unattainable. But the one that comes up most often in this political context of the United States and Canada, genocide, and the obligation so many of us feel to learn an indigenous language rather than just letting them go extinct. So if you're watching this and you're from England or something, if you're from Spain, from some other country, some other continent, you may not know what it's like to every day drive your car down a highway and have cities with unpronounceable place names in extinct languages or nearly extinct languages, or languages where you've never met anyone who can understand them or know what it means. I've actually been on, I studied Ojibwe and Cree. So I say all the time, I primarily studied Cree. My program also contained the unit on Ojibwe. If I just say Cree, people don't know what language I'm talking about. So I normally say Cree and Ojibwe. I studied those languages at First Nations University, Canada. And several times I went on Wikipedia and other websites and I corrected the explanation for the name of a city or town in Canada. Maybe once it was a river, but normally it's a city or town that has one of these names. And the funniest thing was, they had sources. So they would have a wrong explanation for why the town was named what it was. And they'd have a footnote, it's the Wikipedia style, and I could click and I'd go and be able to find the book it was published in. There are people out there treating this, and I would provide a footnote, and I would actually name the pages of the dictionary. It's like, yeah, oh yes, well, allow me to do the incredibly in-depth research of looking the word up in the dictionary. But in Canada, almost nobody has access to a dictionary for Cree or Ojibwe. This is the level of ignorance. Okay, people live their whole lives with the assumption that there is this process of genocide, there are these languages disappearing, and there is nothing we can do about it, that nobody can learn the language, not even the people who genetically are linked to that history. And the answer is no. You can learn Latin, you can learn Greek, you can learn Hebrew, you can do it. It's all up to you. This is not impossible, it's possible. What the part that's difficult is caring. The part that's difficult is having the will and the self-discipline and the commitment to do it. And, looking at the reality of Canada, the United States today, what if there aren't even 500 people? Let's be blunt. What if there aren't 500 white people willing to do the hard work to learn Cree, to learn Ojibwe, to learn any other indigenous language you can name? Do you think there are going to be 500 Chinese people who are going to do it? Do you think there are going to be 500 people at the Linguistic Research Institute in Africa? How about in France or Germany, right? And I'm saying white people, because people, none of us were born speaking Latin. Come up with an estimate of how many people are learning Latin, all right? Either this is possible or impossible, all right? If it's actually impossible, let's think through the implications of that. And if we can admit to ourselves that it's possible, let's really deal with the implications of the fact that nobody is doing it and nobody is going to do it. Right? In this way, the sense of shame, the sense of guilt, the sense of responsibility begins with an awareness that some alternate course of action is possible. Most Americans and most Canadians are resigned to the idea that our First Nations people, our Indigenous people, live in third world conditions. Oh yeah, they don't really have drinking water and electricity and roads the way we do because they live on these reservations that we kind of force them on. And this is just seen as normal, right? Yeah, I guess they kind of have a separate school system. And look, I know a lot more about this than the average person. I'm here putting on the voice of the average white Canadian or white American. Most people have never thought it through. If you ask a white American, oh, yeah. You know how there are those African-American colleges and universities, the special black people, black power kind of going. What do you think the situation is for the Navajo? What do you think the situation is for the Inuit? What do you think the situation is for your own indigenous people? The vast majority of Americans will just be dumbfounded. They'll just say, I don't know. They'll just say, I have no idea. Are there universities for those people? Do those people have their own universities the same way black people, the same way African American people? They do. Have you ever been tempted to enroll there yourself? How about, do you know anyone? Do you know any white people who wanted to compete to get into one of those colleges? Did your high school counselor encourage you to apply to it? Because they're across America, like geographically, they're spread out. I mean, I can say something similar for Canada, right? This is unthought of. Is it possible? Is it possible to provide our indigenous people with world-class running water and electricity and internet connectivity and primary schools, high schools, and universities? Why don't you do a cost estimate of what it would take to raise the quality of life on Canada and America's Indian reservations, First Nations territories, whatever you want to say, to raise the quality of life there to be equivalent to Anaheim, California? What would it take to raise the quality of their high schools and their universities to be comparable to the University of California, Berkeley, to be the most prestigious, the most excellent universities in the United States of America and Canada? And you know what? You might have to make some people uncomfortable. You might have to go to some other universities and shut down some of their departments and say, no, we're closing down this department at this university in a big city, and we're going to take your professors and we're going to go make them live in the middle of nowhere. because we don't want it to always be the middle of nowhere. We're actually going to reallocate resources, including human resources, and we are going to put you out on the frontier to do something new and bold and different. Oh, sorry, that fucks you. Oh, sorry, you find that depressing? You find that challenging? Would you rather go to Mars? Would you feel more pride tilling the soil of Mars or the surface of the moon? Oh, I'm sorry, you don't feel any sense of adventure or do something new? Yeah, you know what? There are First Nations people, there are Indigenous people out in remote areas of Montana and Western Ontario. And you know what? We're not going to accept the fact that they live in conditions that are worse than Myanmar right now. We're not going to accept the fact that their status in this democracy is less democratic than the status of Indigenous people in Myanmar. I defy you. Look it up. A totally racist colonialist system of government here in Canada that was never meant to represent or include Indigenous people, and it still doesn't because we never reformed it. We never wrote a new constitution. We never came up with new electoral practices to include it. It's ridiculous. We have a worse than apartheid system of extinguishment towards our Indigenous people. Oh, yeah, you know what? Some of the most pampered, comfortable people in all of Canada and all of the United States are probably going to have to pack up and go out to a new frontier, which is a lot more comfortable than living under a glass bubble at the bottom of the ocean or in a lunar colony on the moon or Mars. And they're going to have to learn to take pride in that and say, we are the generation that decided this is possible. This is our priority. It's necessary. It's happening now. The whole tide of history of these languages disappearing and our political leaders saying these people don't matter and they're going to be forgotten, we're going to turn it around. We're going to go in the other direction, even if it costs $1 trillion. Because if you look at the annual budget for NASA, if you look at the amount of money being wasted on NASA, year after year after year, and you think, what if that budget was going into First Nations education, Indigenous people's education, and even Indigenous people's plumbing and electricity and some of those things that I've mentioned? What do you think the cumulative effect of that would be after just 10 years, after just 20 years? It would change everything. And it wouldn't just change things for Native Americans. It would change things for white Americans and black Americans and Hispanic Americans and everybody else, okay? And it has to start with a commitment, all right? In the same way that the absurd idea of building a city under a glass bottle at the bottom of the ocean, a glass bottle, that's a good way of putting it, at the bottom of the ocean. In the same way that that ridiculous idea starts to seem moral, starts to seem like a moral imperative when you compare it to the absurdity of Elon Musk's Mars colony, all right? In that same way, when you start to compare what the government actively is wasting billions of dollars on, like the bombardment of Afghanistan and Iraq and the space program and all these things, when you start to compare what the money could be spent on and what it is spent on to this possibility, all right, it becomes necessary to make a commitment and say, you know what? Building a base on the moon sounds like fun. Sending another rover to explore Mars and map it and everyone, it sounds fun. But we have to make a commitment that we are not going to do that. We have to write it down in the Constitution or in the highest level of federal law that you got. We are going to make a commitment. No more money spent on Mars, no more money spent on the moon until our own Indigenous people have caught up, until they have schools and roads and democracy every bit as good as Anaheim, California, or better. Hey, let's shoot for the moon. Let's not be satisfied with mediocrity. Let's actually try to build a utopia. Not in Myanmar. Right here in the United States and Canada. Let's ask ourselves, what would be possible? And let's push up right against those limits of what we presume to be impossible.